In 1980, members of the NATO alliance agreed on a new standard 5.56 millimeter small arms ammunition. The following year, Canadian forces moved to comply with that standard. The Canadian forces have used the FN-C1 rifle and the FN-C2 light automatic rifle since the mid-1950s. Tried and trusted weapons, they have stood up well over the years. But now a new generation of small arms, lighter, easier to operate and maintain, is available. SARP, the Small Arms Replacement Project, was commissioned to select 5.56 millimeter weapons for the Canadian forces. It brought together skilled engineers and seasoned infantry officers who set to the task of choosing a rifle and a light machine gun. The weapons had to pass the most stringent tests the engineers could devise and satisfy the infantry officers that they would be reliable and combat tough. They will use the new semi-armor-piercing 5.56 millimeter round, which is half the size and weight of the 7.62 millimeter round. NATO trials had narrowed the field of possible weapons. There was one obvious choice for the light machine gun, the Belgian Minimi with its tubular butt, carrying handle, and folding bipod. There were two contenders for the force's rifle. The Belgian rifle has a short handguard, a long welded upper receiver, and a tubular folding butt. The American contender has a high triangular foresight, a long, round, ribbed handguard, a carrying handle, and a black plastic butt. The SARP tests were held under carefully controlled conditions. Before the tests began, an identification number was engraved on every part of every weapon, from the receiver to the firing pin. Would the weapons stand up under testing? How much would they weigh? Would they fail under stress? The tests and their analysis would tell the tale. Certain components were precisely measured and weighed in the laboratory. Accurate records had to be kept for later comparisons. Barrels received special attention. Videotape scans were made of their rifling using a fiber optic probe. With such advanced equipment, the smallest imperfections were easily detected. These videotape records would later be used to analyze the effects of prolonged firing. The information about each weapon was entered in a logbook which would accompany that particular weapon throughout its trials. The engineers took some of the rifles and machine guns for lab tests, while the rest went to the infantry for field trials. At Valcartier, the men of 3 Vandus were chosen for the weapons trials. The summer trials were held in June 1982.
Cible à 100. Si votre propriétaire tire par rafale, tirez!
Throughout these trials, the C-1, using the 30-round C-2 magazine, was tested alongside the new rifles for comparison. The soldiers also tried the new webbing, which will be issued with the weapons. The impressions of the men were very important and were added to the files. Like the lab tests, the field trials were careful. Every hit, every misfire was recorded. Test, as information was fed into computers, the evidence began to mount.
Which printout is this one?
Both are fine weapons, but which one is better?
Basically right up to date.
The rifles were fired in every mode,
That's fantastic.
single shot and bursts,
Not too bad.
and from every firing position. The recoil of the new weapons was minimal. They were lighter and easier to handle. Each day, the men were debriefed on their weapons' performance. Every fact and impression was recorded, with special attention to such details as sight picture, reloading, snagging on clothing, or sharp edges which would cut hands. Precision testing of the new rifles took place at LETI, the Land Engineering Test Establishment in Orleans, Ontario. The rifles were mounted and coupled to an automatic firing device on a special test rig. They were carefully aligned with an optical instrument and fired by computer.
Roger, check range is clear. There's a continuation of the test in progress. Confirm weapon mounted and prepared to fire. Select the lever on repetition. Firing handles pressed.
Every shot was recorded, and accuracy and velocity data were added to the growing file on each rifle. The contending rifles achieved almost identical scores, well above those of the C-1.
Mount 117 in the endurance mount. Prepare for scheduled test.
Next, they had to face endurance tests. How long would they perform without breakdown? Would the metals stand the strain? Each weapon fired at least 15,000 rounds. Some were pushed to 30,000. Differences began to show, and some of the Belgian rifles suffered serious failures.
Fire.
Periodically, the rifles were returned to the laboratory for examination.
Chamber.
6.2. 405.
405.
6.4.
Each critical component was carefully checked for wear and damage.
100.
One test used an air gauge to measure barrel diameters.
After gas.
These readings made it possible to calculate the amount of wear since the weapon was last inspected.
Before gas port.
Before gas port.
4.9. 135.
The Belgian Minimi underwent the same exhaustive tests as the rifles. The C2 was tested for comparison. The new NATO 5.56 millimeter ammunition is the first small caliber round which has the performance required for use in a light machine gun.
Tourne un peu à gauche.
Firing from an open bolt position, which reduces troublesome and potentially dangerous crook-offs, the Minimi fires a 200-round belt, or it can be used with a 30-round rifle magazine.
Over.
The Minimi has little recoil. It can fire up to 1,000 rounds per minute. It's far less prone to stoppages than the C2. This combination of features quickly won the approval and respect of the men.
OK. Engagé. C'est ce qu'on va faire, là. Je vais t'enlever comme un temps qu'il prend à prendre la route. OK? C'est
As if the specially constructed field conditions weren't bad enough, the new weapons were put through a battery of tortures. At PT, the proof and experimental test establishment in Nicollet, Quebec, the contenders were subjected to a mixture of sand, dust, and grit, blasted at them in 40-knot winds, penetrating every recess of the weapons and ammunition. The Minimi has two gas settings, normal and adverse. The adverse setting is intended to overcome difficult conditions. But can any weapon be expected to fire in this condition?
Stand by. Fire.
The tortures continued. Unlubricated firing tests, blocked barrel tests, tests with BFAs attached, extremes of heat and cold, and being dropped on a concrete floor. Overall, both rifles performed well. They fired without mishap through obstructions and safely with BFAs. While the barrel of the Belgian rifle bent in the drop test, the American rifle survived, battered but usable.
Rifle ready. Rifle ready. Stand by. Fire. Gun flat. Next weapon.
The unlubricated firing tests checked the weapon's ability to continue to function under adverse conditions. Temperatures were taken before and after firing. Again, the American rifle proved more reliable than the Belgian.
Zero. Rifle ready. Rifle ready. Stand by. Fire. Avancez.
The field trials continued as the rifles were put through their paces in advance-to-contact exercises. The American rifle weighs a full kilogram and the Belgian rifle half a kilogram less than the C1. The new rifles are easier to clean and assemble since they both have fewer parts than the old rifle. The new rifles proved to be more accurate than the C1. The soldiers welcomed their lightweight and lack of recoil. Sore shoulders and black eyes on the firing range will be a thing of the past.
Avancez.
But while they recorded the men's favorable impressions, SARP was still on the lookout for potential design and use problems. What about left-handed shooters? Can the weapons be carried comfortably? Several modifications to the weapons were proposed as a result of the field trials. A jungle atmosphere was simulated in the lab to determine the effects of tropical humidity on metal and plastic. The American rifle proved less prone to rust and fungus growth. Chemists analyzed the composition of the sophisticated alloys and plastics in the weapons. Although Canadian military requirements for such materials are demanding, the weapons were able to meet them. The resistance of components to corrosive and destructive substances was tested in the lab at Quity, the quality engineering test establishment at Hull, Quebec. How well would the weapons bear up to a variety of lubricants, insect repellents, salt sprays, cleaning agents, and a host of other chemicals? As part of the replacement project, tank crews tried out carbine versions of each of the Contender rifles. The Belgian carbine features a folding butt, and the American one a telescopic butt. Both have shorter barrels than the regular version of the rifles. Some of the winter trials were held at Gagetown, New Brunswick. Test weapons were issued each morning, including an interchangeable barrel for the Minimi. Members of 2RCR were chosen for these tests, which had to examine two things: performance in cold weather and handling with bulky winter clothing. RCR, like the Van Dews, quickly came to respect the new weapons. The American rifle had proved easier to handle and snagged less on winter clothing.
Load! Fire!
The Minimi proved to be so well designed that even with heavy winter mitts, the interchangeable barrels could be removed and replaced in a few seconds. As the final statistics were fed into the computers, SARP set about the task of analyzing them. Results confirmed what the soldiers had been saying all along. The decision was an easy one. The Belgian Minimi performed superbly and will become the standard light machine gun of the Canadian Forces. It is far superior in design to the old C2 and outperforms it with ease. It will be issued to the Canadian Forces as the C9. While both the Belgian and American rifles easily outperformed the old C1, the Belgian weapon was more prone to malfunction.
Targets to your front, in your own time, fire!
The tests confirmed that the American weapon is easier to maintain and more reliable. It was the favorite by far of the soldiers. The American rifle was chosen. It will be designated the C7, the carbine version the C8. They will be issued starting in 1985. SARP has completed the most comprehensive tests and trials of small arms ever carried out in Canada. Knowing they are the best that NATO has to offer, soldiers of the Canadian Forces can look with confidence to their new weapons and ammunition.